No, I'm curious. So was love? When did you kind of come across Lovecraft? Do you find him early on in your kind of becoming, or later in life?
Oddly enough, it was the tabletop role playing game from Chaosium, Call of Cthulhu. I found it in high school, and I played the game for probably years before I actually picked up the first story. And then once I started reading him, I was like, okay, I get it. I see why he has stood the test of time.
There's something he does that many have tried, and few have ever come close to implementing it. And there's a thing that I think he understood that even today, like horror writers, I think we all, maybe it's because we all become too precious with like our ideas and what we do, that we somehow think that we're different, and that, oh well, the monster in my head is just, it's so next level and so cool that like I just gotta go over the top and showing you what I'm seeing, when the bottom line that Lovecraft understood is that nothing you come up with is ever going to be as dark as what's in someone's own soul, and you just give them the little pieces, the breadcrumbs for them to create what they need to create in their head. And to me, it's there's nobody that really gets that. I think I've watched one horror movie in the past 10 years, and every October I spend all October doing nothing but new horror movies for every day of the month. I did 101 days of horror a couple years ago. That was a little too much. 3 months of horror movies is too much. I could do October. Um, I think The Ritual is the only one that I've ever seen that's a modern horror movie that you never quite see it. Like these little bits and hints of what you're, but like never enough for your mind to really grasp what's going on, and that's so important. Um, how important it would be to be? How do you feel about it?
Yeah, that the Ritual I think is probably the most recent movie I've seen that has gotten that Lovecraftian feel right. Um, and I've only ever seen, I think, one of his stories adapted that I liked, and it was the Strange Case of Dexter Ward. If I'm getting the title wrong, but the movie was called something else, and it had oh, what's his name, Chris Sarandon in it. And I remember watching that when I was in college. I'd come home on the weekend.
Is that the one that's the comedy?
Well, I don't remember it being a comedy, but the detective goes down into the basement where all of the experiments are, and he's got a lighter, and as he's lighting it, the monster keeps getting closer as the light's coming on. And I remember watching that with my dad, and both of us, when the light would come on, we would, ah, ah. When your dad's getting scared too, I was like, they're doing something right.
Chris Sarandon. There's got some memories of that guy. Um, so you mentioned your dad a couple times. So is your dad someone who kind of started you down this path, or obviously if he had a big bucket of comic books that you discovered, I take it was a passion in the family?
Well, my mom was the avid reader. I mean, you never saw her without a book, but my dad's tastes are probably what shaped me, westerns and sci-fi, the original Star Trek, you know, um, 2001 A Space Odyssey is one of the first movies I ever remember seeing. I remember when I was 4 years old seeing the first Star Wars at the drive-in, sitting in the bucket seat of my dad's van, next to him, and that probably changed my worldview forever because Star Wars as a 4-year-old, you're like, that's reality. And so it took a little while, to figure out that a wizard wasn't going to come and take me on an adventure. So, had to create my own.
That's always my favorite one, is when they compare the Star Wars to Harry Potter, and you realize, oh my God, J.K. Rowling did a 1-for-1 remake of Star Wars.
He did it without it being too much of a remake. I remember my wife wanted me to read Aragon, and I was like reading it, and I was like, why does this seem so familiar? And I got to a point in that line of Chris Rock's in one of the Jay and Silent Bob movies, because George Lucas is going to sue somebody for this. I was like, oh, this is Star Wars set in a fantasy setting, line for line.
Well, and the key is that I mean he straight up lifted the like the hero's journey as close as you could possibly come to writing the hero's journey out. So I mean, it's I guess in essence, he went so close to the archetype that like it's inevitable you're going to be following that archetype in the future. So, um, now I'm curious about how long have you been working in the industry doing what you do? Obviously, you've got a fair number of books that you mentioned. So,
Well, I guess in 2004, uh, I lost my job in the IRL world, and I was like, well, I've been a tabletop DM forever, and all this stuff. I'm going to sit down and write a novel. I did, and I had no clue what I was doing, and I sent it out, and I actually got two positive feedback from agents, and then I kind of put it on the shelf when I had to get go back into the real world and get a job. And then in 2015, I was able to sit back and actually start learning how to craft a story. Everybody kind of thinks that they know it, but there is a lot of work that goes into the craft of story building. Understanding the rising and falling action and plot points and pinch points and all of that stuff. And you know, you can sort of get it instinctively if you're around stories, but unless you understand and recognize the pacing of a story, you know, you're not always going to hit it. So in 2015 is when I really sat down and started doing the work of learning the craft. And in 2017, I pitched a novel to an agent and got representation that didn't really work out after he sat on it for a year and a half. And of course, and of course, I'm going in without any understanding of what's going on in the industry. So, in the wake of the Sad Puppies, I had no idea that I was going to wind up being, just by virtue of who I am, be on the outs with a lot of people. So after I started seeing the way things were going in the mainstream publishing industry, I started looking at smaller publishers and submitting short stories and finally getting published that way. And that's basically what I've been doing. Is just I send out stories to open markets and building relationships with people, and it's just worked out that way.